Hello and welcome to the Christopher Hall Training Podcast. Today's topic is low back tightness and weakness is a myth. What I'm going to do in this tutorial, explain to you why that is, what it is instead, so what is a possible more coherent and consistent reason as to why your lower back is perceived to be tight and weak. And then we're going to talk about how we then go about rehabilitating that. So without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so you're probably one of the next sort of populations. You're either here because you have or you think you have a tightness or weakness in your lower back and you want some help or some information to help you overcome that, or you're working with people that have this problem and you're trying to work out what it is and why it's there, so you've come to learn the information, or you're someone that disagrees with what I'm saying and is potentially going to put a comment in the description below telling me how wrong I am. But what I'm going to try and do in this episode is talk to you a little bit more about anatomy that's involved in this. And then what should then start to happen is you should start to understand and see where I'm coming from with it, because it does go a little bit deeper than what I can explain in this tutorial. So I'm going to use some broad terms, so it won't necessarily be fully understood. But what we will do is start talking about tightness and weakness. So the current model is my lower back feels either tight or weak, or tight and weak. Now what comes with that, the rehabilitation model for that is, okay, well, if it feels tight, I need to stretch it. If it feels weak, I need to strengthen it. And in some respects, that's potentially a valid model, because you are deducing from weakness, okay, we need to strengthen it. Or you're deducing from tightness, we need to stretch it. Now what I'm going to say is the weakness and the tightness is just a perceived weakness and tightness. And I'm going to say that there is some degree of instability in the area. And what the body is doing, it is pulling either tight to create an artificial stability. So if you stretch it, it will just go tight again. If it's feeling weak, there is a part of our anatomy, which I'll explain in a little bit more detail, that acts like a fuse box. And it doesn't let you drive the muscles harder and drive more electrical stimulation in there. So it's acting like a fuse box. If it perceives there is too much force going into a muscle, it just shuts it off. And that is the potential for weakness. So we have to understand why all that's there. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and understand what happens with this stability thing. So when we start correcting that instability, what will happen is the range of movement or the flexibility of the muscle will return naturally, and the strength of the muscle will return naturally, because the instability is being taken away. So one, the body doesn't need to hold it anymore because you're building the stability back in, and also with regards to the strength, the body doesn't perceive a problem in the area, and therefore it is able to drive more electrical activity and stimulation into the area without it needing to shut off. So just by strengthening it and trying to force more stimulation in there, you're kind of being a little bit counterproductive, and you're sort of keeping yourself in a vicious cycle. And it's the same with the stretching. You're opening out a joint, body goes, don't like this, sorry, tighten it back up again. You open it out again, sorry, don't like this, tighten it back up again. So you're constantly in that cycle. If we can understand the anatomy a little bit better, we can start to build a more coherent rehabilitation. So let's look at two areas or two components within the muscle. If we talk about tightness first, we have something called muscle spindles. They detect length within a muscle. So if a muscle gets too long, they send information up to the brain saying the muscle is now this long, what do you want me to do with it? And then the brain interprets that based on the information that the brain has and sends the response back down. And then, as a general rule, if someone has a tight muscle, general rule, the brain will go, I don't like you being that long, tighten back up again, and it will tighten it back up again. With regards to the strength element of it and the fuse box that I talked about, we have what is called Golgi tendon organs in the tendons, obviously, but tendons joined to the muscle, and they detect force going through a muscle. So if they perceive that there is too much force going in, or they detect the force, send the information up to the brain interprets it, and it sends its response back down. Now, if we're talking about the fuse box, it will send the information back down, and it'll just say shut it off. So then it will just shut off the stimulation going in, and it will give you that perceived weakness. So what we have to do is we have to, in some respects, stabilize the joint. Now, not strengthening, muscle activation and a degree of stretching can be useful in this approach. It's not essential. Well, certainly the stretching isn't essential, but the muscle activation is more essential. But we're not talking about muscle strengthening. I'm not asking you to go and lift progressively heavier weights. What I'm asking you to do is to activate the right muscles at the right time to be able to stabilize a joint. And when we're talking about the lower back, we're talking about the pelvis at the bottom, we're talking about the 5 vertebrae of the lumbar spine, and then you've got the bottom of the ribs at the top. So what will generally happen in that area if the body perceives a problem in the lower back? It will just lock that down tight. So QL, the erector spinae group, potentially longissimus iliocostalis, you'll get the lumbar segments of multifidus. They will all just lock down nice and tight. You'll possibly get some areas of tightness through the glutes as well. You may even get tightness in the hamstrings to, again, pull tight from below. But again, the hamstrings aren't great at stabilizing because of where they sit. It's good to have a longer lever to be able to stabilize something, and the hamstrings don't have that. So they just pull tight and, again, give you the perception of tight hamstrings. But when we stabilize the lower back and the pelvis, the hamstrings will naturally loosen because they don't need to be tight anymore. Now, if there is any remaining unconscious perception of that, and what I mean by that is there is a concept called muscle guarding, which is an unconscious, to us anyway, is unconscious. It is just the body saying, right, I want to lock this down, and this down to protect the area. So muscle guarding is there as a protective mechanism. Now, if the injury or the problem, let's just call it, if that's gone, if the pain is gone and the injury is somewhat recovered, that doesn't necessarily mean all the muscle guarding goes away. So it can leave muscle guarding behind. So what we have to do is we have to understand all of this. And it may be that we need to use massage or foam rolling to start reducing the tightness in the muscle. Now, what this then gives us is, as I described before, just like when we stretch, it gives us a window of opportunity. So we are opening out the muscles and the tissues of a joint so it can move a little bit better, which is kind of what the stretching is supposed to do. We can use stretching as an additional part of this stage. So we would basically loosen the area out. Now, what we then need to do is we've got a window. As I described, when we stretch, we get a window of time before the body starts to tighten up again. So what we do in this window is we then start to activate the right muscles. So if it's the lower back, we need to activate glutes, we need to activate muscles of the lower and the mid back, we need to activate latissimus dorsi, we need to activate QL, longissimus, iliocostyl. We need to activate those muscles with exercises. And again, that doesn't mean doing lots of back extensions, because back extensions have an ability to isolate lower back muscles. But what we want to do is we want to start integrating that whole system back together, because not only do we need to re-understand the rehabilitation process, we need to sort of re-understand how exercise works well. And rather than isolating muscles, what's more effective is starting to integrate them and getting them to work together. So using different exercises like a bird dog, like a side plank, like a bridge, like potentially sort of rowing exercises to activate lats or whatever. But again, the goal at the moment isn't strength. The goal at the moment is to get those muscles active. And then what that will do, that will send the signals in to maintain muscle activation, which will then maintain a degree of stability, which will then allow the brain or allow the muscles to communicate with the brain to say, no, I'm still on, I'm still okay, I'm still fine. So what will happen is the brain, and the more we can do that, the more the brain won't need to send the signal to either shut the muscle off and create a perceived weakness, or retighten the muscle to give a perceived tightness. Because what will be happening is the muscles will be functioning more effectively. So we have to sort of perceive our rehabilitation process in this way. Rather than thinking of, I have a tightness, I need to stretch it, that will give a short-term benefit, but not necessarily a long-term benefit. And it's exactly the same with the perceived weakness. You may get a short-term benefit from it, but generally in the long term, it will be less effective. And it will kind of return back to the default and just sort of feel weak or feel tight again. So again, a way of understanding whether this process is happening is if the cycle keeps repeating. So if it feels good to start with, but then it goes back to the way it was, if that's the cycle that you're in, then the rehabilitation process isn't having the effect that you want it to have, and it's having that short-term cycle that you need to keep repeating. If you're getting the rehabilitation process right, or you're going through a more effective one, you will get a slow improvement in it. You may get a sort of a benefit. So let's just say 2 steps forward and 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So you keep moving in the direction, but it doesn't take it out straight away. That again is a part of the rehabilitation process. What I'm not saying is that if you follow that process of loosening a muscle and then activating it, that's not going to happen in one go. That's going to take a period of time, because just like learning a new habit, there needs to be a degree of repetition. It's exactly the same in rehabilitation. There needs to be a degree of repetition that comes with all of this. So it needs to be done consistently. It needs to be measured as well, because if you're not measuring it, then you're just kind of throwing a dart against something and you're not really aiming. You've got your eyes closed, you just throw a dart against a wall or whatever. So you're not really having the desired effect or the potential for the desired effect. So we have to think about it in that way. We have to think about the body differently, and these two components within the muscle spindles that detect the changes in length, and again, this is all driven unconsciously. We aren't conscious of this communication that goes on between the muscle and the muscle spindles. The muscle spindles and the brain. Or the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system. And the same with the Golgi tendon organs that detect the amount of force going in. Because just like a fuse box, if there's too much electricity going into a certain appliance, then the fuse box will just cut the electricity and shut the appliance down. It's exactly the same in the body. Your muscles will just shut down if there's too much force going into them. So we need to build the body out of it, using that more effective, loosen the muscles off, possibly stretch them, and then just activate them, and then allow the body to learn that new role, if you will. So I could keep sort of adding bits to this, but that will then sort of tend to send it round in circles. So what we will do is we will finish it there. If you do have questions and you want to learn a little bit more, stick it down in the comment section below. If you disagree with everything I've just said, if you're going to ask a question, or if you're going to critique what I'm talking about, by all means do it. I have no problem with that at all. But just make it coherent and make it useful when you write it below, because the amount of comments I get that are just people ranting, and it's just like, what are you ranting about? That makes no sense whatsoever. So if you are going to critique it, please let it make sense. And think about your critique as well. That's another good one, because again, a lot of people don't think, and it's very easy to pick what they're saying apart. If you do want help, click the link below. Go through to my how to overcome lower back pain, either online or face-to-face consultation and coaching, and we can get that started as well. If you liked it, hit the like button. So yes, many thanks for watching. I'll speak to you in the next one.